houses of assembly exist at the sub-national levels for legislators to make laws for the good of the people of their respective states. Now, in recent times, however, there have been rancor and leadership tussles in some state houses of assembly in the country, resulting to a gale of impeachment of speakers, as well as claims and counterclaims over who is in charge. From reference points in AKWA, ANAMBRA and ONDO, it would appear that the legislature in some affected states is becoming crisis-ridden and subject of ridicule. Now, what does this trend of legislative rascality portend for democracy and good governance? What are the implications for democracy and the law-making process? This is our focus on Nigeria today. Welcome to the program. My name is Joy OSIAGWU. With me in the studio to discuss state legislature crises and implications is member representing Ngongo and Mjibri Federal Constituency in the House of Representatives, and that's Honorable Bashir Babali. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Also in the studio is a regular face on Nigeria Today and public affairs analyst Jide Ojo. Jide Ojo, thanks for joining us again on Nigeria Today.
My pleasure. Happy weekend.
Thank you. Now let's start with Honorable Bashir. What is at the center of the tension in some affected states? We've mentioned in the introduction AKWA, ONDO and ANAMBRA. Let's get your view.
Well, thank you very much. Before I go further on the center of the crisis, we need to understand what legislators means. Legislator means an electable representative of the people through a legal framework who makes laws and order for the betterment of the society. And in some cases, we do see it as an umbrella or a platform where the laws are made for the betterment of the nation. Yeah, I understand there are crises in a series of states, not only in those states, but even at national level. Because when you talk of politics, crisis is inevitable.
Yeah, well, let's take
but what we are witnessing today in the state of AKWA IBOM, ONDO, and ANAMBRA is uncalled for. And I'm sure if care is not taken, it will bring an end to this democracy.
But do you have an idea of what, I mean?
Yeah, I have little idea for what is happening, because virtually whenever such kind of crisis happened, we do take it at the floor of the House, because I'm sure some representative from those affected areas presented it as a matter of urgent national importance. Like in the case of AKWA IBOM, I think it started from the GALE of defection, from APC to PDP, PDP to APC, what we call cross-carpeting, whereby I think there is a provision of the Constitution which states that whenever there's this cross-carpeting, the Speaker can declare the seat of a member vacant. In the case of AKWA IBOM State, some members defected from PDP to APC, and which I think the Speaker of the House was about to declare the seat vacant, and they went to court. And you see, in Nigeria, we have three arms of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And the judiciary has the sole responsibility, or maybe clearing whenever there are crises,
for them to
even among us, to wade into it and bring an end to it. And the 5 members went to court, and I think one of them, the court declared that yes, the House can declare his seat vacant out of the 5. From what we learned, the guy, because the declaration was made by higher court in AKWA in Uyo, he appealed his case to the appeal court, but lucky runs out of his side. We learned he served the Speaker, he served the House about his appeal, but the House, I don't know what informed the decision of the Speaker, who happens to be a good friend of mine, whom I know he masters the job of legislation, because he was once upon a time the Speaker of Youth Parliament of Nigeria, and a lawyer of that magnitude, decided, despite the fact he said he served him the appeal notice, he decided to declare his seat vacant along with the remaining for members whose case was still in court. After that, we learned the 5 mobilized themselves from what we read on the pages of newspaper, entered the State Assembly complex to organize a sitting, maybe to impeach the Speaker, which on that very day we learned the governor of the state mobilized the executive, the party men, and even some talks from what we read on the pages of paper. And the counterclaim from the state governor of the executive said, no, it was the 5 people along with another very strong politician in the state who were in APC, who mobilized talks and the state apparatus, that is the security, and gave cover to those 5 people to sit and impeach the Speaker. Whatever the situation is, there are crises in Akwa Ibom. Same with ONDO. The issue of impeachment started in the last 2 years, 1 year, since after the election of the governor, because we learned the Speaker, Deputy Speaker, and few others are in the good book of the governor, and other members are not comfortable. We are not comfortable. Whenever they try to impeach, they said the governor do intervene. So they went, orchestrated their plans of impeaching the Speaker without the knowledge of the governor, and they marshal out their plan. They went, they impeached the Speaker, and from what we learned, as they were having their sitting, talks embedded the assembly complex, what they said NURTW. The same thing with ANAMBRA.
Okay.
I think the charges in ANAMBRA, they said misappropriation of resources and what have you, whereby I learned 20 impeached the Speaker and 5 were against the 20, and the Speaker and the other 5 were in the good book of the governor. So from all what we are saying, the governors, the step governors, are at the centers of the affairs.
Good. We'll get, you've raised a couple of issues and it seems as if it's a very complex situation. We'll get to deal with most of the issues you've raised one after the other in the course of our conversation. But let me bring in Jide Ojo quickly here. Let's hear from your own perspective, listening to what he has said and what you know from what you read on the pages of newspapers and probably from your own investigation. What do you make of this crisis from one House of Assembly to the other? State House of Assembly now.
Whether state or national, you know, in the lead up to 2019 elections, our legislative houses has been having their fair share of crisis. Even at the national level, you recall the invasion of the National Assembly complex and the seizure of the mace by the mace of the Senate. And of course, that issue, we don't know where it has led to. The same thing, the invasion of the National Assembly by DSS operatives, which led to the sack of the immediate past DSS Director General. You also recall that something similar happened in Benue immediately after the defection of, shortly before the defection of the state governor, Samuel Otom, from APC to PDP. And that is one thing that is a recurring decimal, or that is common to all impeachment, is political. And anything political cannot be permanently resolved legally. That's the truth. The point is, the law is on the side of the Speaker. You say you can be removed for gross misconduct. What constitutes gross misconduct is interpreted by the lawmakers. So somebody can snatch another person's wife and you say gross misconduct. For that, you are impeached. Whether impeachment of the House leadership or even the governor. And because the law has given too much discretion, there is no certitude about what constitutes gross misconduct. To be able to say, if you do XYZ, then you are a goner. Even this issue of defection or cross carpenting, the law says you can only defect, according to section 68 subsection 1G of the Constitution, if your party is in crisis, if there is faction. And of course, when the National Assembly wants to orchestrate the defection GALE. They copied from PDP in 2014. PDP, some breakaway faction called themselves NPDP, New PDP, and paved way for the defections that we saw massively into APC in the lead up to 2015 election. This time around, some aggrieved members of APC called themselves Reformed APC and paved the way for the activation of Section 68 subsection 1G.
In other words, what's going on has become a vicious cycle.
Exactly. Now, you ask, why is it that at the national level, seats are not being declared vacant? It's because the two leadership of both the Speaker, the Speaker of the House of Reps and the Senate President have also defected. So who declared their own seats vacant? Will they declare their own seats vacant? And of course, they will tell you that there was faction because of this RAPC. But you see, as I said earlier, it is political. And whatever is political, whether you even, when you bring law into it, you can only resolve it halfway. Because today, the law can be on your side, tomorrow, the law can be against you. And you could see that the situation at the national level has become so much of a very confusing state of anomy that virtually every day you see defection across board. As today, yesterday, there are 4 defections. 1 to a PDP, 3 to PDP, 1 to APC. And it's, even in the Senate, there was also a senator that defected to APC from PDP, this Senator Gombe South.
Lidani.
Yeah, so the Lidani. So what I'm saying is that whenever issues take on the gap of politics, it can only be resolved politically.
All right, let me bring in Honorable Bashir quickly. You see, listening to all what we've enumerated here this evening, now the electorate is watching. Do you think they'll take lawmakers as people who are serious with the business of legislation, given all we have heard this evening?
Yeah, maybe before I go further, let me correct my co-brother. You see, the issue of New PDP and that of RAPC differs. You see, I was a member of New PDP. I was among the 34 who come from PDP to APC. And by then, yes, we had the support of Speaker Amini Tambwal. But what of the senators in the Senate? By then, it was Senate President David Mark, who remained in PDP. We fought our own case in court. And it was court that gave us the backing, and with the strength of God, the Almighty.
It's all political.
And the issue of political, to me, in the State Assembly, yes, it's political, but it's with the way and the manner the State Assembly handle their case. You see, they allow, regrettably, the State Assembly allow themselves to be overshadowed by state governors who normally dictate what goes to who and when.
So in that case, given this scenario now, would you say that the lawmakers take this business of legislation seriously?
This is one area I always ask myself question, because we say we are the representative of the people, and to such extent, wherever you find that crisis, you find out the general public are even party to the crisis. Look at the case of ONDO. They said the electorate were mobilized, either talks or whatever name you give them. They are part of the society. They are part of the community. Look at the case of ANAMBRA. There was mobilization of people. Look at the case of AKWA. They said they mobilized people. That is to say, even the society are yet to wake up from the slumber of feeling that, yes, legislator is one arm of government which ought to be respected. Yes, we have issues, but where did the crisis start from? The crisis emanated from even the process at which the members are elected.
All right.
What sort of members do we have? Both at state and local, at state and national level. You see, the type of members we produce will determine the habit and the character they will conduct themselves.
We will come back to the issue of the kind of members we produce and who gets them there and the process through which they got there after we return from this break. The program is Nigeria Today, and we're discussing state legislature and crises and implications on democracy and good governance. Let's now pause the conversation in the studio to hear some comments from Nigerians on the issue.
It's not healthy for our democracy. These kind of things are not supposed to. We are matured in democracy now. We are not supposed to be, putting ourselves in this kind of situation. These are avoidable circumstances.
It's not good for democracy now. It's not good at all in any state. Any state that have a crisis like this, you can't have time to attend to your state or the local government as well. So it's not good. It's not good for our democracy.
Now we are getting there. People are now open eye, because this present government have opened our eyes to know what is happening. Now the people are now choosing their people who they want to be their leader by themselves. So that is why we are seeing all this crisis. If it's the time that governors have right over every other thing, all this will not happen.
The IBOM House of Assembly is the second arm of the executive destiny of IBOM state government. So if they're having some internal crisis, the best is to go to court.
Well, that is the sign of that we are not yet matured. You see, when a child is still a kid, you shouldn't expect him to behave like an elderly man. But when he grows, he will change most of those his or her childish attitude. So the reason is because Nigeria is not yet matured. But as more we grow, maybe we pass all this crisis.
My advice is that we should stop electing mediocres that are not qualified to be to be elected. They're not supposed to be legislators. That's just the way it is.
And from the street, we're back to the studio with our guest. Jide Ojo, before we went on that break, I asked the question which I directed to Honorable Bashir, and I was talking about, for these legislators, do they see this job as a serious business? And you could hear from the respondents there how they're reacting to some of these behavioral patterns that we see both at the state and at the national level of assemblies.
Well, yes, I concede the fact that we need to be more circumspect in choosing our members of parliament. But the issue goes beyond election. In as much as there is executive meddlesomeness in the activities of other arms of government, you will continue to have this scenario.
But how do we change that narrative, given that this probably portends danger for our democracy?
The point is, the governors that orchestrate these problems knew what they were doing. Governance has stopped in many of these states as we speak because of the crisis in the State House of Assembly. How will a governor go and present budget for 2019 now, when there are factions and there are lockups? And this has gone almost every state, but more of southern states experience this kind. I don't know why. It's more Rivers, Kogi, Ekiti, which are several of them, Edo, under Oshiomhole and the rest of them. It's always like that because the governor wants to puppeteer this, teleguide and micromanage the State House of Assembly.
So my question is, how do we change that story?
No, we are getting there. Something significant happened this year, which is in financial autonomy for State House of Assembly. It has not happened before. So the State House of Assembly was at the mercy of the governor in terms of their funding. If a speaker wants to travel, he has to go and seek permission, get DTA and all of that. But now with the amendment that was signed into law on June 8, 2018, by Mr. President, among the 4 laws he signed into law that day, it has given financial autonomy to State House of Assembly. So from 2019 election, we will start seeing State House of Assembly that are more independent-minded and can call the bluff of their governors. But back to the issue of the nature and character of leadership of the State House of Assembly themselves. Many allow themselves to be compromised by the governor in terms of contracts, in terms of other perks of office, which makes them blackmailable. So when the governor has used you and he feels that you are no longer of interest to him, he orchestrates or engineers your impeachment. And all he needs to do is to just call some few members. What we have seen and which needs to be addressed is the illegality, even in the impeachment processes. Because if I mean, they have their own independence purportedly by the law, but you have a scenario where a quarter or number that doesn't form a quorum will sit and impeach their leadership. Without following, that is not following due process. Even in cases where governors are purportedly been, or deputy governors have been impeached, you will see that in 90 to 100% of the cases, when they go to court, the courts nullify such.
And that takes me to the issue of the court, Honorable Bashir. How do we get the judiciary to wade into the situation so that we can have a clear way forward?
Well, thank you very much. I'm with my brother. You see, one problem we are having is one thing to have a legislator, and it's another thing to have a legislator who understands what his responsibilities, rights, and privileges are. You see, similar case in the federal level, but you hardly have a case, experience a case the way we are experiencing in. Since from the inception of our 8th Assembly, we have been having issues internally in both House of Reps and Senate. But hardly for you to see such kind of impeachment and whatever, because we know there are procedures and there are processes. Because we know that there is a doctrine that guides our business, that is the standing orders of the 2 houses. Likewise, the State Assembly, they have similar. But the way he put it, because the State Assemblies allow themselves to be pocketed by state governors, who normally take the shot and decide what goes to who and how. And you see, at the center of all this crisis, you will see state executive. Sometimes you will see SGF. Like in the case of AKWA, they said even the governor himself was there. But they're saying he was there because he's the chief executive, chief security officer of the state.
So, Honorable Bashir,
now the issue of judiciary, that is one area where I feel the judiciary needs to come in. Yes, judiciary do dispense justice, the way he said it. But the problem we are having is the timing. At the time you find out the justice they dispense is just a mere academic exercise. Take the case of Adamawa State. They only dispense justice when even the tenure of the governor has even passed, and they said that due process was not followed.
Like I said from the beginning, it's a complex situation. Now, back to the legislators themselves. So, I get this impression that most of them go into the political process without having a better understanding of what they need to do.
Well, the problem we are having is even from the electioneering process, from the primaries. When the governors in Nigeria become mini-gods, they decide who gets what and how.
All right.
They decide who becomes State Assembly, who became member House of Rep, who became a senator. In some cases, you have been hearing complaint here and there across parties, both PDP, APC, that there was no primaries. The governors just pick their favored ones and send them there. By the time you send someone, he will play your...
All right, I want to have your closing thoughts. Let's start with Jide. So how do we have identified the problem? We've seen how complex it is. How do we move forward from this? Well, just briefly, what would you suggest from your own perspective as an analyst?
I think we are in the campaign season now. We need to take our candidates to task, examine them through political debates, town hall meetings, assess them. What is the nature and character of the person presenting himself or herself for governance, either as a governorship candidate or as a member of House of State House of Assembly or Parliament, National Assembly. 2 is also for our judiciary to stand to and expedite justice. Like you said, in many instances, look at the case of Sunday Oyebuchi, the deputy governor to Sullivan Chime, that was impeached over Chike or running poultry. At the end of the day, by the time he got justice, his tenure was over. So if we can fast track the hands of justice, so that when people run to court, the court does justice delayed is said to be justice denied. So we need also men of character to be in the state and national assembly, people of integrity, who will not sell and compromise themselves because of mere pecuniary interest.
Honorable Bashir, if you could make it just quickly.
Well, I think it's a collective responsibility. All hands need to be on deck, both the civil society, the media, the politicians, because the legislators are people from the general public. And lastly, I want to state that I feel this is one area where I expect the Attorney General of the Federation to work up to his responsibility. There are constitutional issues, and they are yet to be addressed because it concerns his party. It concerns maybe because it also concerns his party. That is why he refused to.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. And that's Nigeria Today. But before we go, we'd like to thank our guests in the studio, and we'll start with Jide Ojo, who is the public affairs analyst. We want to thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Of the season.
All right, and I also want to thank Honorable Bashir Babale. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And we also want to thank you to the viewer for your time. Remember, you can watch this edition or any other edition online at youtube.com/NTA News 24 Hub. See you again for a fresh edition of the program. Till then, I am Joy OSIAGWU. Thanks for staying with us.